Hi there, and welcome back to our series of Adaptive Fisheries Assessment and Management Toolkit training videos. So now that we've set the stage and gone over the toolkit as a whole, we're going to dive into these step by step. So in this next video, we're going to go over steps 1 and 2. So these are the management tiers and fisheries management controls. So as a quick roadmap, what is exactly a management and assessment tier, and how does AFAM help you choose theirs? And how do we choose appropriate fishing control measures? So step 1, management tiers. So as we talked a little bit about last time, the type of management that's appropriate for your fishery often depends on how much data is available. So sufficient data to conduct several data-limited assessment methods with independent representative data streams represents science-based management. So this is something you might be able to do if you have 1 or more years of data. But if you have less than that, if you have less than a year of data or even almost no data, you can work with precautionary management. So here are the 3 steps shown in a schematic, the 3 tiers based on your different amount of data. So tier 1 is again the precautionary assessment and management tier. This is a place you might be if you have less than 1 year of any of the types of data that AFAM uses. So underwater visual survey data, catch and effort data, or length composition data. Tier 2 is a preliminary adaptive assessment and management framework. So this is about 1 year of catch and effort data or length composition data. And then Tier 3 is a really multi-indicator framework for adaptive assessment and management. This is when you have 2 or more years of catch or effort data and length composition data. Now, even if you are only in, say, Tier 1 right now, potentially over time you might have more data and you might move up to a Tier 2 or maybe even a Tier 3. And so with AFAM, as time goes on, you can revisit the framework and think about whether your fishery is moving from a Tier 1 to a Tier 2 or a Tier 2 to a Tier 3. So here's a snapshot of the AFAM Toolkit dashboard, which helps you determine your assessment and management tier. So on the left-hand side, you select the type of data that are available, and then you actually upload your data. And on the right, you'll see a summary of the data that you've uploaded, and it will automatically tell you which assessment and management tier your fishery falls into. So something else that we've included in the AFAM toolkit is a sample data set. So if you want to download the data and see how your data should be structured, you can do that. Additionally, you could work through the entire 8 steps of the AFAM Toolkit dashboard using the sample data set. So step 1 is pretty easy. You upload your data and you determine your assessment management tier. Now let's move on to step 2, which is determining what fishery management controls are most appropriate for your fishery. So there are many potential choices with pros and cons of each. We talked a little bit about this last time. There are input controls like size limits or gear restrictions, effort controls or seasonal restrictions. There are output controls like catch limits, so restricting how much harvest there can be from the fishery. And then there are spatial controls. So these are things like no-take zones, closures, that could be protection of special spawning aggregations. Lots of factors might influence your choice. So of course the biology of the stocks, so certainly considering things like the size and maturity could help influence what sort of size limit you might want to choose. It's important to have fishermen understanding and buy-in. So you want to make sure that the people who have to abide by these controls understand why they're doing them and buy into them. Data availability is important. So to have a catch limit, you really have to have a good sense of the total catch coming out of the fishery. And so that's a restriction for many places. And then feasibility. Some management controls are easier to implement and easier to enforce than others. Of course, each control has unique benefits and limitations. Now, we've provided a whole list of case studies of where these controls have been implemented in other small-scale fisheries globally. And so we encourage you to check those out to get some ideas about what might be appropriate for your fishery. So let's go through a couple of the sub-steps for Step 2. Step 2A is to summarize your existing management controls. And so we acknowledge that many places already do have some management controls in place. And so the first step is to really look at those critically and think about how well they're working. So to summarize them, we think about things like the mandate. So is this a control that the local government instituted, or is this a national policy? How expensive is it? How costly is it to implement this control and to enforce it? Are people complying with it? Do people believe in it? What's their attitude towards it? Are people generally supportive of it, or are they not too supportive of it? Do we think it's effective in actually helping improve sustainability? Are there any other pros and cons? And so the hope of this step is a determination to either keep this control or maybe replace it with something else. So step 2B is to think about your suite of fishery management controls that you'd like to implement. So there's a really nice decision tree in the guidance document of the toolkit that asks some simple questions and basically walks you through different management options. It's also color-coded to give you different management options based on which assessment and management tier you fall into. And so during this step, you'll sit down with a group of stakeholders and walk through these different options to come out with potentially a suite of different controls you might be interested in. Step 2C is to think about how you might combine multiple fishery management controls to meet your goals. So no single control is perfect. For example, catch limits are great at maintaining biomass, but not necessarily length structure or habitat. So you might want to combine this with something like a size limit and a no-take zone. And so in this step, you list your fishery management controls, existing and new, evaluate them with a series of tables. Each of these tables talks about the various biological, social, and economic consequences of the different types of management controls. From here, you can make sure these align with your goals, assess potential effectiveness, and if beneficial, think about how you might combine multiple fishery management controls. Step 2D is to think about feasibility. So what's worked before? How easily do we think this can be implemented and enforced? Do we think it's socially and politically feasible? And do we think fishers are going to comply with this? Do we think this is going to be successful? And finally, once we've determined which controls we want to do, we might have to choose some specifics. So for example, how big would we need to make the size limit? How much would we need to reduce effort, etc.? And so the toolkit provides guidance on how to set these initial controls. And then once established, AFAM can be adaptively used over time to adjust these controls to make sure they're most appropriate for the fishery as things change and over time. So the dashboard itself has a system for recording your selected fishery management controls. And again, in the guidance document, there's detailed instructions and discussions and tables on each of the management controls. For our breakout activity now, I encourage you to take a look through the AFAM guidance document and look through the instructions and references for steps 1 and 2. And I encourage you to actually go through steps 1 and 2 and record your choices and notes in your AFAM Toolkit worksheet. So that's your paper worksheet. And also record your choices in the AFAM Toolkit online dashboard. Thanks so much for watching our training video on steps 1 and 2. And we look forward to seeing you back for the next steps.